ke bhaktir bhavati naishti. Panchashirsha hinaguptam pratiharena sarvataha anvesha amanam rishabam apraudham kamarupini. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: the woman was protected on all sides by a five-hooded snake. She was very beautiful and young, and she appeared very anxious to find a suitable husband. Purport: the vital force of a living entity includes the five kinds of air working within the body, which are known as prana, apana, dhyana, samana, and udana. The vital force is compared to a serpent because a serpent can live by simply drinking air. The vital force carried by the air is described as pratihara, or the bodyguard. Without the vital force, one cannot live for a moment. Indeed, all the senses are working under the protection of the vital force. The woman who represents intelligence was searching after a husband indicates that intelligence cannot act without consciousness. A beautiful woman is useless unless protected by the proper husband. Intelligence must always be very fresh. Therefore, the word apraudham, very young, is used here. Material enjoyment means utilizing the intelligence for the sake of rupa, rasa, gandha, shabda, and sparsha, or form, taste, smell, sound, and touch. So we will have three learning objectives for the day. The first learning objective is what is prana, apana, dhyana, samana, and udana. The second learning objective is to explain intelligence as it relates to consciousness. And the third learning objective is to explain rupa, rasa, gandha, shabda, and sparsha, or form, taste, smell, sound, and touch. So let's start with the first subject matter of this purport here, which is prana, apana, dhyana, samana, and udana. So this subject matter of the five airs is there in many scriptures. Prabhupada has cited this in many verses in the Bhagavatham, in the Bhagavad Gita, and it is there in multiple Upanishads. And of course, the concept of prana is evident in the Vedanta Sutra as well, in the second chapter. So let's start with some basics here. So I'm going to start explaining this first from Prashna Upanishad, which actually is the Brahmana section in the Atharva Veda. And there are many commentaries of this Upanishad that exist in the multiple schools. And it exists from the perspective of the Sharirika Bhashya, Shri Bhashya, Madhva Bhashya, and so on. And the Upanishad is set in a question-answer form, and basically this deals with all these five subjects. And there was a sage called Pippalad, and he answers questions from six sages. And so it is like questions and answers from six sages, Zukesha, Satyakama, Gargya, Kausalya, Bhargava, and Kabandi. And and in these, he explains these five vayus or airs, prana, apana, dhyana, samana, udana. So what is prana? So this is explained by Ramanujacharya in his Sri Bhashya, which is the commentary that he wrote on the Vedanta Sutra, that prana, even though it can be translated as air, but on the other hand, it intimates it's the breath of air, having assumed a specialized form. So, in a sense, it's a transformation of the air into a specialized form as one breathes. So in the Vedanta Sutra, it says in the second chapter, in the 2.4.10 onwards, it describes all these things. So again, we can see there that in the Sri Bhashya, he says, Ramanujacharya says, it may be falsely argued that this prana, which Prabhupada calls here as vital air, so one may think, is that the individual spirit? So if this prana, if it leaves the body, then it indicates that the person also has the soul has left the body. So what is its relationship with the spirit soul? So it may be. So one may be. So the Vedanta Sutra clarifies this by saying that it may be falsely argued that this vital air force, okay, is the individual spirit soul itself, but it is not. It's only an instrument of associated with the soul. As long as the soul is in material, as long as the soul is in the body, identifying it, as long as the soul is caged in the body, it's an instrument of the soul, and so the vital force is not the soul. So that's the first conclusion that's made in the Vedanta Sutra in the in the second chapter. So what is in this vital force? So this vital force pervades the entire body. Okay, it pervades the entire body, but it does not have any particular function like the senses. Like, for example, the eyes. Through the eyes we can see, through the ears we can hear. So it does not. It's not like it has particular functions like that, but it acts as a primary agent of the soul for governing the senses. So the different functions, the physiology of the different parts of the body are being governed through these different vital forces, okay, and as the primary agent of the soul, subservient to the soul. So the Vedanta Sutra goes on by saying, just as but here 5 different vital forces are being mentioned here. One is prana, apana, vyana, samana, udana. So then what are these 5? So that's clarified further in the Vedanta Sutra, where it says that just as the mind is said to have multiple functions, in the same way, prana, the vital force, which is a transformation of air as breath, so that itself transforms into 5 subsidiary functions, and those subsidiary functions in turn are prana, apana, vyana, samana, udana, and prana itself becomes a subsidiary function called pran, apan, vyan, samana, and udana. So now again there can be an argument that it can be argued that the vital prana is all pervading, but again, the Vedanta Sutra says there that being the agent of the soul, which is the jiva soul I'm talking about, the atomic jiva soul, so the vital prana is also really atomic. So that means that when the soul leaves the body at the time of death, this vital prana also leaves. So it is not like in any aspect there is no superiority here compared to the soul. So but the vital. So what all we have learned so far here from the Vedanta Sutra, that is the Brahma Sutra, it says that it's clarified that the vital prana, which we call as the life air, is not the spirit soul. And then the Vedanta Sutra also says it's not a sense organ. So, but though the subordinate, all these pranas may be sometimes taken as such because they move through the different apertures of the sensory gates. So the body has different sense organs, and each of them has their own gates, the holes, and through which these vital air moves. So sometimes it's very confusing whether it is the sense organ or not, but it is not. But it functions, and it makes those different organ systems in the body function. So this is the basic understanding of what is prana, as illustrated by in the Vedanta Sutra, which is actually a summary of all the Brahmanas, Upanishads, and all the different aspects of the Vedas. It's been put together in the Vedanta Sutra by Vyasadeva himself, and pretty much every school has a commentary, and our own commentary is the Govinda Bhashya. So, since um, um, Ramanujacharya has dealt in detail with this prana, I basically spoke more from the Sri Bhashya here. But so all we have learned so far here is that the prana is the life air, which in turn can be subdivided into prana, apana, vyana, samana, udana. We're going to talk about all those things, and then we said how it serves as the agent of the soul, and when the soul leaves the body, the vital force as well leaves the body, and it is again not any of the sense organs, but since it permeates through the different apertures of the sensory organs, okay, sometimes it can be a little confusing there, but it basically the air in different. We're going to talk about the different subsidiary of the five aspects of the prana. So for this, the different five aspects are clearly defined in um, um, uh, what is called as the Prashna Upanishad, which I first started with you about Sage Pipalad talking to his six sages who are asking these questions, and there he explains, he defines all these five terms, and what he says, and this is I'm going to just take this from a commentary from Madhvacharya, written on Prashna Upanishad, where he says that what is apan, so that is in the life air, in the excretory and generative organs of the body. Okay, so that is both reproductive organs and excretory organs, and that is called apan, and it can also be called as the downward breath. In the eye, in the ear, and the mouth, the pran itself subdivides itself into what is called as pran, and that's the vayu there. So in the middle, that is in the digestive system. So there is saman, which balances the food offered, and then, but still pran. Prashna Upanishad clarifies that pran is the prime breath and the vital air, and then which is transformed, which is the breath. When it becomes operational, it's distinguished as pran, apan, saman, udan, and so on. So apan here is the downward breath, and what is vyan? Vyan is the bond that sustains life when there is inhaling or exhaling, and saman. Okay, so it also to indicate both inhaling and exhaling, and udan to indicate the state when the soul is led to deep sleep. So there are so many variations of examples of where all this life force acts in different Upanishads. So Prabhupada actually cites in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2 from the Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.9. So where Prabhupada says the atomic soul is floating in five kinds of air. And what are the five kinds of air? It is pran, apan, vyan, saman, and udan. Is situated, and so the soul is situated within the heart, and it spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living souls, the living entities. And when the soul is purified from the five kinds of material air, its spiritual influences exhibited. So that means that one does need to get purified of these five kinds of material air. So when the soul is engaged in the material body, so it's floating in these five different kinds of air. So if we want to look a little more of the description of these five kinds of air, the subject matter of this purport, we can look into Bhagavatam in the purport in the third canto, chapter 6, verse 9. Prabhupada again describes this a little more in detail. From the Bhagavad Gita, he expands this in the Bhagavatam. So where he says that the movements of the body are first generated from the heart, and all the activities of the body are made possible by the senses, which are in turn powered by 10 kinds of air. So here Prabhupada there are some Upanishads actually that talk about 10 kinds of air. So we spoke about the 5 here, which is mentioned in this purport, but there are 5 more which are furthermore um, not as prominent as these 5, but there are 10 different airs which are described in the purport in 3.6.9. And so, what are these 10 kinds? And Prabhupada describes all the first 5 are the ones that are mentioned in the purport that, of this today's verse, and there are 5 more described in the third canto. So, and what are the 10? So, one is the main air which is passing through the nose, and when someone breathes. Okay, so that is a life air that someone breathes, and it's called as the prana. And then let's take the next one, which is apan. So here Prabhupada says the air which passes through the rectum as evacuated bodily air is called apan. So that is this apan. Then the air which adjusts the foodstuff within the stomach, which sometimes sounds as belching, is called as saman. And then the air which passes through the throat and the stoppage of which constitutes suffocation is called udan. And then the total air which circulates throughout the entire body, okay, that is feeding the different organs, is called as the vyana. Subtler than these 5 airs, so these are the gross 5 panchavayus, the gross 5 airs we discussed, and then there are 5 more subtle ones which are not described in this purport, but they are described in the third canto. So, and what are those 5 airs? And those 5 airs are that which facilitates the opening of the eyes, mouth, okay, and that is called as the naga. And then the air which increases the appetite, called as krikara, and the air which helps contraction, called as kurma, and the air which helps the relaxation, like when mouth is open, that is yawning, is called devadatta, and the air which helps sustenance, called as dhanjaya. So all these airs, the 5 gross and the 5 subtle, I'm calling gross, but it is nothing to do with the gross body, but the 5 prominent ones and the 5 subtle ones, all these airs are generated from the center of the heart. Prabhupada says that, which is one only. The central energy is the superior energy of the Lord. So even then, it is the marginal energy which is surrounded by this external energy, but still the central energy is the superior energy of the Lord who is seated. So within the heart, with the soul. So the soul and the super soul seated in the heart, who act under the guidance. Okay, and the soul acts under the guidance of the Lord. And this is again described in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 4, in verse 27. But here, Prabhupada talks more about it in a different perspective, like how the apana vayu is air, goes downwards. Okay, so here he talks about the directional movements of these air. Apana vayu goes downwards, whereas vyana acts to shrink and expand, but samanu, it adjusts equilibrium, but udan goes upwards, and when one is enlightened, then one engages these in searching of self-realization. So the engagement of these airs is a prominent function that is used in the Ashtanga Yoga. So it is not that these airs are, so in the yoga ladder, which I will talk about as part of this learning objective, we can see how as one progresses from one stage to the next stage, depending upon the proclivity of the living entity. So we can see how in the Ashtanga Yoga, so this is in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, how one can actually use these airs, these movements, whether it is moving downwards, shrink and expand, equilibrium, upwards, how one can use all these in self-realization and as moving towards God realization. So, and this concept of these 5 vayus, which Prabhupada has nicely put in this purport here, because without this purport, this is the beauty of this purport is the translation is it's there, but it talks about a 5-headed serpent. but Prabhupada has so nicely said what exactly it means. So this it's clear. So this purport is so important to say how important are the purports to understand a verse. So so these values are also covered in many other Upanishads. So even though I cited primarily from the Vedanta Sutra and the Prashna Upanishad and some commentaries of Madhvacharya of the Prashna Upanishad, but you can find these concepts in Chandogya Upanishad. It is there in the Katha Upanishad, Undaka Upanishad, and so on. And Prabhupada actually cites from some of these Upanishads and some of his verses. So the list. So in one of these scriptures, it also talks about prana as the inward moving energy, apana as the outward moving energy, dhyana as the circulation of energy, udan as the energy of the head and the throat, and saman for the digestion assimilation. So there are minor variations here of what all these function as, in which what is the directional movement, and what is the how exactly they are involved in the physiologic functions. So they are there are variations across scriptures, but the central concept is very similar in terms of its position with respect to the soul, and with respect to the gross body, and with respect to the subtle body. So that kind of description is same everywhere. But there are some subtle descriptions of how, in terms of their functions and the directional movements in different scriptures. For example, in the Sri Bhashyam, commentary of Ramanujacharya, and we spoke about it in the beginning of this lecture, um, in 2.4.12, so where Ramanujacharya actually says in his purport that all these values must still be held as different functions of the vital air force, which is prana. So the vital air force prana in turn subdivides into these five different airs. So the conclusion he draws there is that this breath itself is a fivefold form, apana, vyana, and so on. And the prime purpose is that it serves the purpose of the individual soul, and thus it only occupies its position as an instrument. Okay, it only occupies as a position as an instrument. And in the Bhagavatam, in the 11th canto, Prabhupada says, but in all species of life, this vital air, it remains unchanging, and it follows the spirit soul. So it follows the spirit soul as the soul moves from one body to another. And he also cites from the Mundaka Upanishad there in the same 11th canto, 3.1.9, talking about the situation of the soul in relationship to prana. So the soul is, Prabhupada says that the soul is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. So the atomic soul is floating in these five kinds of air, prana, apan, vyana, saman, and udan, and the soul is situated within the heart, and it spreads its influence all over the body of the living entities. When soul is purified from the contaminations of these five kinds of air, then the spiritual influence is exhibited. So a similar description we also saw in the Bhagavad Gita, and here in this verse we can also see that about the five-headed serpent, that this vital force is compared to a five-headed serpent. So the serpent, which is described as with five heads, is the life air which is acting in these five circulatory processes. So these five airs, which we spoke about, they are the means by which the life air acts. So in another verse, he actually Prabhupada again gives an analogy of the serpent. The serpent analogy is not only seen in this verse, but in another verse in Bhagavatam, as one's body engages in sense gratification. So as we become old, Prabhupada says that we become weaker and weaker daily. So that means here the vital air becomes so weak that here it's compared to a weak serpent. So this is another place in the Bhagavatam where the serpent analogy is used for the vital air. So the life air has also, in this verse, in this purport today's verse, the life air is compared to a serpent. But but in another verse in the same canto, I think, in about 2 chapters after this, the vital force within the body, it becomes weak. Okay, at that time, it's compared to a weak serpent. At such a time, the symptoms of death, that is, death starts appearing, and as the vital force is about to leave the body after the soul leaves, when the soul leaves, and then that's when the dangerous soldiers of the superintendent of Lord Yama approach. So all the living entities. So this is in the eighth canto of the Bhagavatam. He further confirms this about the vital force. Prabhupada says all living entities, moving and non-moving, they receive this vital force. And this provides them their bodily strength and their lives from the air. So it's a transformation of the air in the form of a breath. And all of us follow the air for our vital force exactly as servants follow an emperor. So the vital force of air is generated from the original vital force, the source is still the supreme personality of Godhead. So, and then Prabhupada further says in the eighth canto, that the Lord Himself is the original source of this material creation, the life force, the senses, the five elements, and the three modes, and all of them are part of this. All of these are part of the Mahat Tattva. So that Krishna Himself is the eternal time, and um, and this is the main subject matter, or this is part of the subject matter of Ashtanga Yoga. So we don't hear this again and again in our Bhakti Yoga literature, because our focus is not really on these life pairs. But still, as the Bhagavatam covers pretty much every aspect, whether it is Sankhya Yoga, and it covers all the different aspects. So this is the subject matter in the Ashtanga Yoga, and still the Bhakti Yoga covers pretty much everything. So they specialize, and it's special. So this process where we are talking about specializing in the breathing process. So the last part which I want to talk to you, I haven't even finished the first learning objective, but everybody, what we have to, so I'm just going to talk about a little application of these five principles. So everybody has a different proclivity. So depending upon the proclivity of the individual Jiva soul to a particular yoga system, so somebody might be having a proclivity towards Ashtanga Yoga, some for Karma Yoga, some for Jnana Yoga, and then along the yoga ladder, one may proceed towards Bhakti Yoga. And so, but Prabhupada says that engaging these different airs in through the Ashtanga Yoga process is a very difficult process in the age of Kali. So mastering these airs and the breathing process is something that's done by the Ashtanga Yoga practitioners, and it's all this elaborated in the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as part of the yoga ladder. And the goal of all this is to encourage faith in people, so that those who are very particular that they see tangible results in this very lifetime, and which may not be spiritual, then but still their faith slowly develops. So there is a kind of a place for all these different yoga systems in the as one progresses towards the Bhakti Yoga. So one, in order to engage these different airs, one needs to follow the different practices in this yoga system, which is in the Ashtanga Yoga system, which will include, of course, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dhyana, and and ending with samadhi. But then, like for instance, I'll give you a simple example here. When you use pratyahara, which is like withdrawal of senses, it is almost doing the job of what a bhakti yoga will do, but in a different way. And what way it is doing? It is called pratyahara, is withdrawal of senses. So it means that you practice with these principles and withdraw your senses from anything that is material. That means, of course, you're going to be conducive for spiritual development. But in Bhakti Yoga, we don't do this withdrawal of senses, but we instead dovetail our senses um, in for the pleasure of the Lord. So that is the difference in the way in which. So one is negating, and the other in the Bhakti Yoga it is engaging. And so, what do these people get here? Of course, the siddhis can be received, and that is anima, mahima, lakima, prapti, prakamya, ishatva, vashitva, garima. So that is making oneself smaller or bigger, and all these kind of siddhis can be obtained. But all these elements, there is still an element in it which is conducive to Krishna consciousness. Even though one is practicing these kind of yoga systems, it is still part of the yoga ladder, and and those people who have proclivity towards this aspect of the yoga ladder do this, but it is still conducive to Krishna consciousness because they are still withdrawing themselves away from senses. For example, in the stage of pratyahara, moving towards meditation towards Vishnu, which is dhyana. So that ends my first learning objective today, which I spent a little more time. And then the second learning objective today we're going to talk about is the subtle bodies, which is the subtle body, which is intelligence, and how it relates to consciousness. So that is again covered in the purport today. So from all the authoritative statements, if you see the Vedanta Sutra, so we can see there that all the components of this world, okay, so they are the five elements, which are the earth, water, fire, air, ether, and Bhumi, Rapi, Nalo, Vayu. So these five elements, they are called as the Mahabhuta, okay. So beyond this, you have the subtle elements. One, you have the false ego, you have the intelligence, and the mind. So and these are, and you also, so you have the unmanifested stage. Okay, so on the unmanifested stage are the three modes of material nature. So and then you have the five senses. Okay, so and then you have the and then you have the mind. So all these elements. Okay, so when you analyze these elements, so this kind of systematic analysis, Kapila Dev does it exhaustively in the third canto. That you, when you see the five great elements of gross representation, so they are the gross representation of the subtle false ego. So you have the subtle element false ego, and that expresses itself in the five gross elements, which we spoke about, which is the earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And then you have consciousness. Okay, so then you have intelligence. Okay, and that in the unmanifested stage, it is the three modes of material nature. So so all this is part of what is called as the pradhana. So the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and false ego. All these things are invisible to us, but and then the visible parts are, of course, the gross body, which is composed of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So let me draw some conclusions here. So I will make it easier here. So number one is that first conclusion that we can draw here is that the soul is different from the subtle body. Okay, that the soul is finer than the intelligence. So that's one conclusion we can draw from here. So the mind, in turn, is above the mind is so, and there are gradations even in this subtle body, where above the mind is the intelligence, and above the intelligence, of course, is the spirit soul. So from the gross body, more subtler is the subtle body, which is mind, intelligence, false ego, and then above that, and more subtle is the soul. So the bodies that we perceive with our material vision, they are called the gross material bodies. But then within the gross body, the subtle body exists. The only thing is that we cannot see it, but we can perceive using our intelligence. So Prabhupada says that finer than the subtle material body is, of course, your subtle material body, which is composed of mind, intelligence, and false ego. You have the spirit soul, which is not material, and this soul is the source of the consciousness, the source of life in the body. So a human being, because of elevated intelligence, has the human being can use the intelligence to choose either to spiritually evolve and get out of the material. So this is the exhibition of the free will of the living entity by using the intelligence to get out of the spiritual, get out of this material consciousness, or to go to a lower consciousness level. So less intelligent people who would consider sense enjoyment as the goal of life and squander and to please their senses, so they are going to be using their intelligence and the absorption in material ambition would make them choose in such a way, so that is the exhibition of the free will to move towards lower consciousness. But this intelligence itself becomes, what we understand here is that it itself can lead to liberation from bondage, and misery. So that means a truly intelligent person therefore rises to a standard of real enjoyment. And if such a person is serious and has a good fortune, he will come in contact with a spiritual teacher. And by the mercy of the spiritual teacher, they can establish the relationship with the long lost relationship with our merciful Lord. So in this verse, in the purport, you can also see there that there is also mention here of the love between a man and a woman, and as a perverted reflection of the true love of an individual soul of the Lord. So it means that the material nature itself is a perverted reflection of the spiritual reality, so what we see is in the material, in that material reflection is illusory, like a dream. So it means that the only difference is that the dream is individual, while this dream is called, but we see the entire world, so it is a collective dream there. Okay, but beyond that, there is an absolute reality, which is which the perverted reflection is based upon that. So let me summarize all what I said here so what we have here is the material world. It has the 5 elements, and it has gross and the subtle. So the earth, water, air, fire, and the space. So these are all gross, and then you have the mind, the intelligence, false ego. So these are the subtle. So this is the second thing that we learned. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about here is to connect intelligence and consciousness. And what we're going to, and how do we learn that? We learn that this intelligence, okay, the subtle body intelligence, I'm talking about the subtle body intelligence, is part of the separated external energy of the Lord. And how do we know that? Because Krishna says that Bhinnane Prakriti Ashtara, the 8 elements, okay, and intelligence included in that is Bhinna. It is separated part and parcel of Krishna as the external energy. But consciousness is a symptom of the jiva, as a marginal energy. Okay, for us, I'm talking about the living entity here. Consciousness is a symptom of the jiva shakti, which is the part of the marginal energy. But intelligence, the material intelligence I'm talking about, is part of the bahiranga shakti as described by Krishna. But both the gross body and the subtle body can both be spiritualized when they are engaged in the service of Krishna. So that means that it does not mean that someone who is liberated from the material existence, they are going to have, there is not going to be any intelligence there. That means that the subtle body intelligence can also be spiritualized into the spiritual intelligence, which is we see that in terms of prajna, and see, just as how the gross body can be spiritualized, like when we make an offering, when we make, let's say we prepare food, which is composed of the 5 gross elements, but then when we offer to Krishna in a proper spiritual mood, and it can be spiritualized in the same way, the material intelligence, which is part of the Bhinnasha, which is separated energy, material energy of the Lord, can also be spiritualized, and that is the exhibition of the free will. So that concludes our second learning objective, to understand the relationship between intelligence and consciousness. The last learning objective, I'll be quick with that, is to explain Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, Shabda, and Sparsha, which is form, taste, smell, sound, and touch. So when there is an interaction of so where do these 5 come? So when there is interaction of the 3 gunas, okay, so we all know that initially there is one Mahat Tattva, which in turn, of course, gets divided into the 24, okay, that is called as the Vimshati Tattva, Chaturvimshati Tattva, right, 24 elements. So, and this is the Sankhya philosophy, and Lord Kapila describes all this in detail to his mother Devavati, right? So to analyze these 24 elements, on what are they? So one is the 5 gross elements: the earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then you have these 5 which are mentioned here in this purport, called as the Tanmatra, which is the means by which they act. One is Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, Shabda, Sparsha. So that means Rupa means taste, Shabda means sound, and then you have sparsha, which is touch, gandha, smell, and so on. So the wind is from wind is related to, so the gross element air or wind is related to, let's say, sparsha, okay, that is touch. Like water, the gross element water in turn is related to this tanmatra, which is called as rasa, which is or taste. Okay, same way, like if you see the spring air, okay, so that gross element if you see, then it can be related to smell, all and so all these varieties of enjoyment, so they make the life very pleasing, and then in this way they engage the soul further in the material existence. So basically, what we have here is the five gross elements and the five means, or these five are subtle. So in the sense that you have earth, water, fire, air, ether, so they're all gross, and then you have the subtle ones, which is smell, taste, color, touch, and sound. So, and the Bhagavatam says, but all these is part of pradhana. So pradhana is the total material energy, and this is described in third canto, which we have already went through. And this is part of the Mahat Tattva. So what is Mahat Tattva? That's the total energy, the energy in the material creation. Therefore, and Krishna himself is called Mahat Padam. Mahat Padam means under whose feet the whole Mahat Tattva exists. So Mahat Padam, so under the lotus feet of Krishna, the whole material energy rests. So that means that the total energy of the material creation, which is called Mahat Tattva, Pradhana, then when this Mahat Tattva, so how is this going to differentiate? And it's going to differentiate when it is getting agitated. And how is it going to get agitated? By the three modes of material nature. So when you agitate by the three modes of material nature, the one becomes 24. And that is called, and that one becomes, and this is all explained in the Sankhya philosophy. And but for us, again, we will see an application here. So, and what is the application? The application is that all these five subtle elements mentioned here, that is rupa, rasa, gandha, that is like the sound, touch, and all these things can again be used in the service of Krishna. So in all the three learning objectives, we spoke about different aspects, but we concluded that with how it can be spiritualized and can be used in the service of Krishna. For example, Prabhupada, I think somewhere he says how, like in the, or I'm not sure exactly where I heard this, but all these elements, the five subtle elements that are mentioned here, smell, taste, color, touch, and sound, can be used in Krishna's service for example, just in our Mangalarati itself. Like when we hear the names during the kirtan, we are able to use sound, and then there is when we see the deities, and then there is taste and smell. So all those five elements, there is an application of use in the Mangalarti, but I'm not so sure. I remember that exactly how it is all the five, how they appear in the Mangalarti. But then the whole program of Krishna consciousness is how to use whether it is the gross elements or the subtle elements, and whether it's the subtle body, and all of them can be spiritualized and used in the service of the Lord. So thus we finished the three learning objectives. So in the first learning objective we spoke about the five different airs: prana, apana, vyana, samana, and udana, and then we spoke about how it is used in the Ashtanga Yoga, and how that can be and its relationship with the yoga ladder, and how it in turn it can be used in one's progression towards up in the yoga ladder towards Krishna consciousness. And in the second learning objective, we spoke about intelligence as it relates to consciousness, and we spoke about how to spiritualize the intelligence and its relationship with the external energy and consciousness in terms of its relationship with the superior energy of the Lord. And then we spoke about the last learning objective is Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, Shabda, and Sparsha. So here we spoke about how these five elements as in relationship with pradhana, and how it exists in how it comes in terms of its differentiated state upon agitation with the three modes of material nature, and how these five can again be used for service of Krishna and spiritualizing it. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll open this conversation for discussion. So thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for another It was very, very interesting to learn a lot of things today. I have 4-5 questions, if you can answer, Prabhuji. Really learned a lot today. The first question is about, you were talking about, in the 11th canto, it says that these 5 airs, they follow the spirit soul from one body to other. So my question is, so the life airs are also going from one body to other along with the subtle soul, a subtle body, as there is like during how the subtle body transmigrates, or when the subtle body transmigrates and then takes the shelter of a body, again the life airs come into play. I didn't understand that clearly. Can you please tell me, Prabhu?
Yeah, so no, you're right, Mataji. So when the soul leaves, that means that when we say that the vital force has left the body, the vital air has left the body, the prana has left the body. So that's when the soul is the main element that is leaving the body, and the vital force leaves with it. Yeah.
Okay. So meaning when the soul is leaving, the soul also leaves. That's what it means. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then the second question is, what is the source of chitta in the body? So you were saying, of course, consciousness is the symptom of the soul. Meaning, chitta means awareness, right? Like, how do we define it?
Can you repeat that, Mataji? I'm barely hearing you. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So, what is the connection between the chitta or the consciousness and the 5 life airs?
And the 5
life airs.
Oh, the life air. Oh, okay. No. The consciousness is the symptom of the soul, which is all pervading in the body, and this life air is nothing to do with that at all, because this life air is a transformation of the material energy. The air that we breathe is transformed as the vital force in order for the different senses, the gross senses, to perform. So in order for the material senses to perform, this life air acts as an instrument. So it acts as an instrument. So there is it's not a this whereas the consciousness is a symptom of the soul, because the soul has 3 symptoms. And what are those 3 symptoms? One is that its existence itself is one symptom. And then you have, in one sense, you can call it chaitanya or consciousness or chit, in different whatever ways you want to translate that as. And then, so that is the second symptom of the soul. And then the third symptom of the soul is, of course, it's the ananda part, where it wants to, where it is in bliss. So these are the 3 symptoms of the soul, and that soul is floating in these 5 airs in the body, which are actually used for as an instrument for just the bodily organs to function.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah, please complete. Yeah.
No, that is all, Mataji.
Okay. So that means when I say chitta is consciousness, or does it mean the awareness that I'm having as a spirit soul?
Can you tell me that again, Mataji? I'm so sorry. I'm just barely hearing you.
Oh, is it? Okay, one second.
Sorry.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
So my question was, so chitta is consciousness, meaning awareness of existence of the soul.
So, the chit is a very detailed subject, Mataji. So the sat is the the eternity, existence, whatever. So, and the chit, the consciousness, is the so let me put it this way to you in a very simple terms. Like you have a jada, and then you have which is matter, and then you have a spirit soul. For example, when you see a table, so it is not conscious of its it is not conscious. So that element is not there in it in particles in a table. But even there, we have to be careful because the super soul is still there, even in the table. So as Paramatma. So and I would just leave this there because the concept of chit itself is such a huge subject. So and it will go so much away from this purport. But if we go into that, it will take such a long discussion because it's a prime property of the soul, which is the consciousness. And so. And all we are concerned about here is to transform that material consciousness into spiritual consciousness, and so that so I think that would, but it's not like the sat and the interrelationships, because what you're talking about is the interrelationship between sat, chit, and ananda, because you're talking about.
Actually, my question is, when I say chit, I mean just my awareness. That all. That is the question. I mean, we say consciousness is a symptom of the soul. So when we say that, my awareness of being there, is that what we mean with the chitta?
So, in one sense, it can say that, Mataji, but all I was trying to say is, but it is such a huge subject because you have several Upanishads and Vedanta Sutra verses that are clarifying that just aspect of chit about existence and as it compares with jada matter. And so one aspect for sure, what you're saying is it does give. There is an element of awareness of its existence. That aspect is there, but all I'm saying is there is like so much beyond that just that one aspect of in for as far as chit is there.
Right. Yeah. That's true. So then that's good, Prabhu. And the next question was about this was so you gave references from 369 and then you also gave reference from Bhagavad Gita, and you combined all of them together, and also 427 Bhagavad Gita about the directions, and you put everything together and you gave this, but I see that so the life air prana that moves upwards, apana moves downwards towards the rectum and the generative organs, and then we see the feeding or that is the feeding organs, meaning around the stomach. Feeding all the. Is it? No. Okay. No. Vyana, I'm saying that goes to all the sense organs. Comes from inhalation, and it is an equilibrium. You said, right? Meaning it has equilibrium, and the throat udana helps with the choking, and it is exhalation, and it helps with shrinking and expansion. Now, adjusting footsteps, which is samana, that is the belly air or the air that goes with digestion, that also moves upward, is what you said?
Mataji, so that's this thing is there are so many differences, across different. Even among some Upanishads, there are minor differences here and there. So sometimes it's very hard to make a conclusion again whether it is upward, downward, whether it's equilibrium, because Prabhupada okay, so this one, see here in the Mundaka Upanishad, it says prana is inward moving, Apana is outward moving, Vyana is circulation, and Udana, all it says is the head and the throat, and Samana about digestion, assimilation. It does not give anything about the direction.
Direction. Okay.
But then Prabhupada, in his fourth chapter, he says that Apana goes downwards, and then Vyana shrinks and expands, and Samana is equilibrium, and Udana is upwards, and Prana is inward.
That's very
that. And Prabhupada says that in his purport in 4.27.
Yeah, you said 4.27.
27, yeah 4.27.
Yeah, I think I wrote it down wrong. Okay, that was clear. Yeah, and then I have one more question. If you remember or if you're able to catch the verse, you were talking about the serpent becoming weak. That the other analogy of the serpent is given.
It's two chapters after this in the same same episode. Same when he becomes weak. It's like two chapters after this. I don't remember the verse, Mataji, but it's like two chapters after this.
Okay.
It's not. I think it's not this. If this is 25th chapter, I think it might be 27th chapter.
Yeah, it makes sense, Prabhu. I mean, a lot of things made sense to me today. It was very interesting. Thank you very, very much for taking this effort to research so much and give us everything at one go. Definitely a class to be saved. Thank you very much for all the efforts that you did, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Dandavat pranam, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for the beautiful class. Hare Krishna, is there anybody having any questions for Prabhuji? Please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranams. I too had a question on the same lines as Preeti Mataji. You had mentioned from some reference that the body airs follow the soul, but then you also said that these are material. So are you saying that these material elements follow the soul when they transmigrate? And my other question is, why is the intelligence supposed to be young always, as said in the purport? Or fresh?
What is the second question?
The purport says that the intelligence is young or fresh. There's a specific Sanskrit term, and why is that so, and what does it actually mean, Prabhuji?
So that is what it says there is about application of intelligence. So that's what when we say that very young, that's what we discussed here about application of intelligence, so that the intelligence can be used for if it is unused. Okay, so when we say this is young and everything, it is being used. So if it is unused or if it is misused, that is the exhibition, the use of the free will, and then so that the consciousness, so one can go to lower consciousness, so that means they will take birth in the lower forms of life, or one can spiritualize the intelligence. It is always young, fresh. That means that you're using it wonderfully for the service of Krishna, and then you spiritualize the intelligence. So that's what is. So we need to use the intelligence. We need to. It's not something that is supposed to be misused or unused. Does that answer?
So you're saying when you use the intelligence, it's called as young and fresh, Prabhuji? Is that what you're trying to say?
So when we say it is so when we say that it is when Prabhupada says it is fresh, anybody can maybe add more to what I've said, but basically what I get out of that is that it is when he says that it's fresh, that means that it has to be used wisely so every day when we are listening, that means like a young mind, a young person is considered to be in a learning mode, and they are constantly learning, and they are moving forward with their um, development, whereas the stereotype for a old um, um, for old is everything is already learned. Now they are happy with status quo. They don't want to do anything new and fresh and so on. So here it is always the intelligence when you're using in Krishna consciousness. It is ever young. So that means that you're transforming from material to spiritual intelligence. It's always the intelligence is nicely using the elements of how to convert the gross and the subtle to spiritual, and it is constantly engaging it in the service of Krishna. So that means it is young, fresh, and always using everything in the service of Krishna. That's the understanding I get from this. But if there is any other, because basically this is more like a purport to the purport. So if there is anything more which I think if I've said anything incorrect or anything that I missed, I would appreciate if anybody else can add to this. So.
Also, Prabhuji, you had mentioned in your class that it was very fleeting. You just mentioned in the passing that you mentioned something about the material world being a perverted reflection and a dream. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Okay, Mataji. So what I said there was this material world. So if we look at the very first verse of the Bhagavatham, 1.1.1, it will tell you about, it talks about the illusory, the different activities that whatever our perception of this material world, when I say our means a non-devotee's perception of the material world is illusory. That means like if we say that, it's like a dream. So many things are happening in a dream, but they don't have any factual reality. But even in that dream, there is one reality. And that reality is if we can bring Krishna there, then we can wake up from the dream and get out of that illusory existence. So we have our dreams. So all that we see is if we see things from a material perspective, each person sees that as an individual dream, and the whole material world is more like that of a collective dream. But then when you are able to spiritualize it, then you will be able to see the real spiritual world and the transformation of the material world, the illusory material world that one has been seeing, to the beautiful Vaikuntha planetary system, which is variegated in its expression and nicely differentiated, and we will be able to see the spirit. So that's basic. So in very simple terms, what we see here in terms of the cross body, the subtle body, all these kind of things is the material world that we're seeing, and that perspective is illusory. That's what I meant, Mataji.
Okay, Prabhu, thank you so much for your explanations. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji, once again for such a beautiful class and very nice question answer session. If there is no more questions, we can end the call here. Is there anybody having any questions?
Hare Krishna Mataji, Hare Krishna Prabhuji. I have a small question. Prabhuji, you mentioned that that you say intelligence to go to the higher consciousness and to come out of the material consciousness. But usually in a day-to-day life, mind reacts faster than intelligence. We always deal everything with the mind. So can the intelligence control the mind or overtake the mind, or does the mind it will follow the intelligence. How does it go? The mind and the intelligence. Thank you, Prabhuji.
The scripture says the controller of the senses is the mind, and above the mind is intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul. So, so we all can see that the soul is finer than intelligence, but above the mind is intelligence. So that means that we have to. So there are two ways here, Mataji. So one is, even if somebody is not able to, it is sometimes very hard. Like when we to for every second to use the intelligence to shift the mind from how to control the mind. That's basically what that is. So using the intelligence to control the mind, and using the intelligence to control the mind by our own effort can be a very difficult process. But then if we are able to somehow or the other think of Krishna all day, then the mind can be controlled by proper spiritualization of the intelligence. But when the intelligence is properly used to control, so that is the way that we have prescribed in any bhakti yoga. But then the control of the mind is there in so many other in the yoga ladder, whether it is in dhyana yoga. So the control of the mind is there, because when we look at the process, it talks about withdrawal from the senses, and the control of the mind is there. Because if one has to meditate in dhyana, one needs to be able to control the mind. But then there is the big difference there is doing that by our own effort, without the help of the Supreme Lord, versus taking the help of the Lord to do a subsidiary function. This is not the goal for us. Controlling the mind is not the goal, but it automatically happens as so when we say to cross the ocean of, so what is the verse in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita? Maya metan tarantite. So in that verse, to cross the to get over the Maya by our own effort, it's going to be very hard. But if somebody is able to approach the Lord, then they're able to control the mind. So does that briefly answer your question, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhuji. So I'm trying to understand the super consciousness, that is the Supreme is inside us, super soul, and with the with surrendering to the super soul, or with the by chanting his names, or with going near to the super soul, we can train the intelligence, and then the intelligence in turn can go to the mind to always be in to move to the higher consciousness. So we take the help by the soul inside us, within us.
Yeah, so you can, as in either in the Paramatma feature or in the Bhagavan feature, as whether either way, whether you're taking help from the immanent Lord as the super soul seated in the heart next to the individual soul, or with the transcendent aspect, which is the Bhagavan feature, either way. But in general, the yogis will seek the Paramatma feature. But as devotees of the Lord in the Bhakti Yoga platform, generally we seek the Bhagavan feature, which is the transcendent aspect of the Lord in his supreme glory as the personality of the Godhead. So, but it's the same. The same thing is achieved either way.
So. Oh, okay, Prabhuji. So what you say that Aham Brahmasmi, that is what you're saying about the superior soul. They go towards the superior soul inside their own body. But we in Bhakti Yoga, we go to the transcendental Krishna or the God.
No. So you have the Brahman, which is So you have the Brahman realization. You have the Paramatma realization, which is the super soul, and this is in detail covered in 2.1.2.11 in the Bhagavatam. Padantita Tatvidam Tattvam Vijnanam Advayam Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdete. So you are talking about Brahman, but I was talking about the Paramatma, the super soul, which is next to which is seated as a silent observer, according to Mundaka Upanishad, as two birds sitting on a tree, one enjoying the fruits of the labor, but the other is just silently watching it. So the yogis, as like Madhvacharya is Madhva Muni, he's a yogi. So he is. So they are focused on the Paramatma as the super soul, Vishnu, as the Kshirodakasai Vishnu, who is as a super soul in the heart. So they are focused on him, but we are focused on the Lord in Goloka, in the Vaikuntha planetary system, in Goloka, in the Bhagavan feature, as the transcendent personality of the Godhead. So you have the individual soul, which is the Jiva soul, and then you have Paramatma, which is the all-pervading aspect of the Lord as Kshirodakasai Vishnu, existing everywhere, which is the focus of the munis or the yogis, who they are focusing when they are doing dhyana. They are focusing on the Vishnu, who is on the milk ocean, who is actually there in our heart as the super soul, as Paramatma, and then you have in the transcendent aspect in the Vaikuntha, in Goloka, Vrindavan, he is existing as the personality of Godhead in the Bhagavan feature. So there are three here, not two. You have Brahman, you have Paramatma, and you have Bhagavan.
Okay, Prabhuji, now got a clear understanding. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Okay, thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna,
I have two questions. First of all, like you said, that when the soul leaves the body, the vital force, that the vital air, the prana, that also leaves the body and accompanying the soul to another body. So how come? Because soul is again, is spiritual, and the air is material. So isn't the prana goes and mixes into the air, that is the gross element, and the soul itself leaves? Because how come the material follows the spiritual?
No, that is there. Because it's a logical question you're asking, so I'm going to answer it in a way which is in a similar way. Because it's not just the soul alone leaves, right? Because even the subtle body is leaving, the mind is leaving, the intelligence is leaving, the false ego is leaving. Everything is leaving with the soul, right? So when we didn't, so even though those are also not part of because they are also part of the separated external energy of the Lord, because it says ashta, 8 are there. That's what so other than the 5 gross elements, and then the 3 subtle elements also. The 3 subtle elements leave the body, and then the vital force, which is just a modification, a transformation of the element air, okay, which is the breath, okay, so it leaves the body. So so we say that the prana has left the body, so that means the vital force has left the body. So the same concept, if we can say that for the vital force leaving the body, we can also say that for the subtle elements too, right? Because they are also not spiritual. When we talk about the subtle body from the material perspective, they are also not spiritual. So, but when we talk about, but all of them can be transformed, of course, as I said, because I just don't want to convey a wrong meaning that as though intelligence, if somebody is in the spiritual domain in Vaikuntha, let's say those who are under the control of the internal energy, it doesn't mean that the spirit souls in that kind of an existence in Vaikuntha, that they all are not intelligent or something, because it does not mean that at all, because all there is this spiritualization, the use of everything in the service of Krishna. That's the use for intelligence. So even though I'm saying here, even though Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita that the subtle body intelligence, that is the material intelligence, is part of the subtle body, but everything can be spiritualized, even water. So one can say that even water is material, but the same water can also be used in Krishna's service. Then it is spiritualized. So it means, like in the Vaikuntha planetary system, you have spiritual waterfalls, you have spiritual rivers. So I don't want to confuse between the two aspects there, but basically that's the message. So when you have in the subtle body itself is not it's not spiritual. So the same logic exists there too. So.
Okay. And Prabhu, you said that the world being perverted reflection, that is also illusion. Can you just...
What is the question? Tell me again, Mataji, about perverted reflection.
While answering to one of the Mataji's questions, you said lastly that the world being perverted reflection is also an illusion. So what does it mean, sir?
No, what I meant, I don't know what exactly I said. I'm sorry if I said anything incorrect. But when I was speaking fast, I don't know whether I said anything. But all I meant there is that the perverted reflection is what we, through material life, whatever we see through. So there are two kinds of vision. One is material vision, and you have a spiritual vision. In the spiritual vision, one will be able to see the Vaikuntha planetary system. So it is all pervading. It's not like the Vaikuntha is there. The locus standi, which is the position of the Vaikuntha, is somewhere that it's in that part or this part, because it is all pervading. Because Krishna is all pervading. Wherever Krishna is, there is Vaikuntha. So that means the Vaikuntha is all pervading. That means that when we are able to see the reality, which is the spiritual world, the variegatedness of the Vaikuntha planetary systems, then we are seeing things as it is. But then when we are seeing things from our material vision, like we see our kids, our so-called husband, wife, mother, father, all those things are perverted reflection of what actually exists in the spiritual world. We are seeing that in a perverted way. We are not actually seeing it as it is. That's what I meant, Mataji.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Maybe, Prabhu, that life air thing, right, that created the confusion. If the verse is being told, I think you said 11th canto or something, one can probably just refer to that verse directly. Right?
Okay, yeah, that is best, Mataji. I think that's best, because that one sentence maybe created a confusion. I'll give you the purport, and maybe you can just read that and get a better understanding there. So give me 1 second, Mataji. So the verse number is where I saw that. Okay, 11.3.39.
Okay, forward that.
I think that's what it is. I think you can. I hope that's the verse, but that's the purport or where it is seen. But it's best not to get confused with that, because it's not like it's a super important element in our Bhakti Yoga literature. I mean, those are all things which people who are following Ashtanga Yoga, they need to be more worried about these kind of aspects. For us, I don't think it's really that a big matter of worry. But if that simple that thing about prana leaving with the soul, but if there is some confusion there, we can see that purport. But and at the same time, I haven't seen that anywhere. In most of the literature, that thing is not like it's not the main subject matter that is said there. That it leaves whether it just the prana just goes back, the vital air, what exactly the path of movement is not like an exhaustive subject matter that's dealt with. Every scripture talks about the 5 different subsidiary aspects and what it does in the body, but there is not much I can find anywhere about its movement from body to body and stuff like that. So maybe that purport is the only place where I have seen it. So if there are more, maybe you can maybe research it from that purport. So
okay, Prabhuji, sure.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. You mentioned the 23, I guess, material elements. Did you, or the 24 includes consciousness? Or would that be?
So,
did you list them during the class?
No, I don't think I listed them, Mataji. I just listed parts of them. The rest are all in the third category.
Yeah, I've always been interested in going into this a little bit more poised, like in the Gita, that verse in chapter 13, where it lists the elements. I've always had trouble with reconciling the way it lists it here with other things. So, is it possible for you to list them, or is it too much for now? I mean, I know there's like the five sense objects, five gross elements, mind, intelligence, ego, But, sometimes I hear about 23 elements, 24 elements. So I want to get like a definitive list of these 23 or 24 elements,
So, I think the best place to find that would be the third canto in the Bhagavatam, where in the instructions of Lord Kapila to his other Devavati, that's where it is best. I mean, what I could do is maybe I can pass, I will take the list from there and I will pass it to the Vinita Gandharvika Devi Mataji, and then maybe she can send it to you. Would that be okay, Mataji?
That's great. Thank you. And also, just quickly also concerning this list, when we hear about the, I think it's called tanmatras, that refers to the five sense objects and five something else, or?
Which one, Mataji? Sorry, I didn't get that.
I probably didn't say it right, but the tanmatras.
Oh, tanmatra. Yeah. The five. Yeah. Yeah, they are the modes of operation. They are subtle. So the five gross elements are the Bhumi, Ravi, Nalovai, which is earth, water, air, fire, and the space, ether. And then you have the five subtle elements, which is sense, taste, color, touch, and sound. That is the modes of operation, yes.
Okay. So the five gross elements and the five...
Prabhupada calls it as five subtle elements.
The sense objects, right?
Yeah. Subtle elements, smell, taste, color, touch, and sound.
Okay. All right, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Koti Dandavat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Gurudev Ji. Thank you very much for your nectarian class and special answer.
Thank you, Mataji. Dandavat Pranam, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much once again for the beautiful class. If there are no more questions, we can end the call here by offering obeisances to Prabhuji and all the Vaishnavas. Vancha kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta Krishna Vrind ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. His Grace Jayananda Prabhuji ki jai. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for the wonderful class. Hare Krishna.